For 38 years, Raymond Ray Dole lived his life by the clock. He didn't think of it that way. To him, it was just the job. Same route, same streets, same stops, same faces climbing up and down the bus steps with that half-tired, half-resigned look you only see in people who ride public transit at 6 a.m. You could have set your watch by him. If his bus was scheduled to leave the depot at 4:57 a.m., it rolled out at 4:57 a.m. Not 4:56, not 4:58. He knew how long each red light lasted on Eastern Avenue. He knew exactly when Mrs. Lopez would wave from her driveway, still zipping up her nurse's jacket. He knew that if he got stuck behind the garbage truck on Monroe, he'd lose 58 seconds, and he'd have to make them up somewhere else. For nearly 4 decades he did it, 5 or 6 days a week, in heat and dust and rain and occasional desert snow. He drove through divorces, births, funerals, elections, recessions. He watched kids grow up in the rearview mirror, from strollers to high school hoodies. When Ray finally retired at 67, the city transit department gave him a plaque and a sheet cake, and the supervisor said all the usual things. Never missed a day. Never caused an accident. Always on time. They shook his hand, patted him on the back, and went back to work. Ray went home to a mobile home outside Henderson, carrying his plaque like it weighed 20 pounds. The pension was small. Not nothing, but not much. After the bills, there wasn't much left. He clipped coupons, drove an old pickup that rattled when it hit 50, kept his thermostat a little higher in the summer and a little lower in the winter. He had a bad knee from decades of climbing bus steps. It ached when the weather changed. He slept in a bed that felt too big since his wife, Maria, had died 7 years earlier in a hospital 3 miles off his old route. He talked to the TV sometimes, just to hear his own voice. To anyone who noticed him at all, Ray was the definition of ordinary. But he had one strange talent that no one, not even he, thought about as anything special. Ray could feel time, not just in the sense of being punctual. He felt it in his bones under his skin. Give him a stopwatch and ask him to close his eyes and count 60 seconds in his head, and he'd land on 59 or 61 more, often than not. Ask him how long it had been since you started talking. He'd say, about 3.5 minutes, and be right within 10 seconds. Decades of driving taught him that. You can't run a route without developing an internal metronome. Lights, stops, dwell times, gaps between passengers. Everything became a rhythm. Somewhere along the way, Ray's brain stopped needing a clock to keep track. It was just there. A quiet, steady beat only he could hear. The night everything changed started like something so small, he almost didn't remember it later. A phone call from an old coworker. Ray, the voice crackled through the cheap handset. It's Benny. You still in town, old man? Benny had driven Route 23 for years, one line over from Ray. They hadn't seen each other since the last Union BBQ. Still here, Ray said. Where else would I go? Benny laughed. I'm in Vegas for the week, he said. My daughter stuck me in one of those casino hotels. You should come down, grab a drink. I'll be parked at the bar, losing my Social Security. Ray almost said no. It was a Tuesday night. It was raining. One of those weird desert rains that felt like the sky was apologizing more than actually trying. He could stay home, heat up canned soup, watch reruns. But he'd been talking to the TV too much lately. Yeah, all right, he said. Which place? The casino was like a different planet. Ray always hated driving by them early in the morning, seeing the neon still buzzing while the sky turned pale. It made him think of exhausted people stumbling out into the daylight with empty wallets. But inside at 8 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday, it looked like a movie set. Carpet that tried a little too hard to look expensive. Lights that never really turned off, just changed intensity. Music playing somewhere. Not loud enough to dance to, not soft enough to ignore. And machines. Rows and rows of slot machines blinking and chiming and humming. Little beacons calling out to anyone with a few dollars and a pulse. Casinos love men like Ray. Retired, lonely, sitting on pensions and stories. The kind of guys who believed in lucky streaks and feeling it this time, who would sit for hours feeding $10 at a time into machines that were designed to take and take and take. Ray had always thought it was stupid. He liked knowing where his money went. Gas, groceries, occasionally a birthday present for one of his grandkids. He made his way to the bar Benny had mentioned. Benny wasn't there. Ray checked his watch. He was 10 minutes early. Old habits. He stood there awkwardly for a moment, not wanting to start drinking alone. His knee hurt, so he looked around for somewhere to sit. There was an empty chair at an older-looking slot machine just a few steps away. He lowered himself into it with a quiet groan. The machine flickered to life. "Lucky strikes," the screen announced in bright letters. "Jackpot up to 25,000. Ray snorted under his breath. "Sure," he muttered. "And I'm the Pope." He had no intention of becoming one of those guys feeding their rent money into blinking boxes. But the chair was comfortable. The machine gave him something to look at. And he did have a $5 bill folded in his wallet, the one he kept for parking meters and vending machines. He slid the bill in. The machine chirped, turning the 5 into credits. He pressed the spin button with the absent-mindedness of someone pushing an elevator button. The reels whirred and blinked, a blur of cherries, bars, sevens, and little cartoon diamonds. They stopped. Nothing. No win. No lights. Just a soft beep telling him his credits had decreased. He shrugged and pressed the button again. Same spin, same whir, same sequence of lights on the edges of the frame. This time he watched more closely. Something tugged at his attention. He didn't know what. It was like hearing a bar of music out of tune. He pressed the button again when he felt like he should. The reels spun, stopped. This time 3 identical symbols lined up in the middle row. Not a jackpot, but enough for the machine to celebrate with a little fanfare. Win 40 credits, $4. Ray sat back. "Okay," he said under his breath. "Beginner's luck." He watched the machine's idle animation for a moment. There was a soft, almost imperceptible tick under the whine of the electronics. The kind of sound you only noticed if you were very, very still. Ray frowned. He had spent decades listening to engines, to the sound of brakes, the feel of acceleration, the rhythm of the bus vibrating different ways on different streets. Mechanics had joked that if they revised his pension, they should also pay him as a human diagnostic tool. He heard something in this machine now. Not an engine, a cycle. He pressed the spin button again, this time not immediately, but when that internal hum lined up with something. He couldn't have explained it. He just waited half a beat longer than his hand wanted to, then pressed. The reel spun, stopped. 2 mid-level symbols lined up. Enough for a little payout again. He played again, this time pressing the button a little too soon, before the beat reset in his mind. The machine gave him nothing. He frowned. "Don't be stupid," he told himself silently. "You know it's random. They're computers." Still, his hand hovered over the button. He waited. The subtle hum, the barely there flicker in the corner LEDs, the rhythm of light cycling through their attract pattern. It all fell into a loop again. "Now," he pressed. The reels whirred, then clacked to a stop. Mini jackpot. Not life-changing, but enough that the machine belched out a bigger sound. A rising chime, then a cascade of digital coins on the screen. Someone at the next machine glanced over. "You're hot," the woman said, chewing her gum. "Nah," Ray replied. "Just lucky." But inside his chest, his heartbeat had changed tempo. He was a bus driver. He believed in schedules and math, not miracles. And what he was seeing on this machine did not feel like chance. It felt like timing. Benny texted 15 minutes later. "Benny, running late, man. Dealers being slow with cashing out. You still here?" Ray stared at the words. He looked down at his pile of credits. He had turned $5 into a little over 60. Not exactly a retirement plan, but also not what he'd expected. "Ray, yeah. At some machine by the bar. No rush." He stayed, not because of the money, because something in his brain had quietly flipped into curious mode. He wasn't a scientist. He never finished community college. But you don't drive a route that long without learning how to test a hunch. He watched the machine's idle cycle again. He started counting in his head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Lights on the side panel pulsed in a simple pattern. The reels did a tiny nudge animation every few seconds, as if reminding passers-by they existed. He pressed the button at different points in that cycle, just to see. Sometimes nothing, sometimes tiny wins, sometimes mid-tier hits, But every time he waited for that same internal click, that moment when his body said now, even though his eyes saw nothing special, the results seemed better. Not 100%, not magic, just better than they should be. And that was all a man like Ray needed to get hooked. Not on the gambling, on the puzzle. Over the next couple of weeks, Ray started making excuses to go into town. He'd drive his rattling pickup down the highway, tell himself he was just walking around, getting some exercise, people watching. He kept ending up in the same two casinos. At first, he stuck to that one machine by the bar. Then he started looking for others like it. Older cabinets that hadn't been updated yet. Same layout, similar animations. The model name printed in small letters near the bottom. Lucky Strikes. Lucky Strikes Deluxe. Lucky Strikes 2X. He noticed that the newer machines, the ones with high-definition screens and complicated bonus rounds, didn't feel the same. Their rhythms were more chaotic, their patterns less transparent. But the older Lucky Strikes line, it danced to a beat only he seemed to hear. He bought a cheap digital stopwatch from a discount store, started carrying a small spiral notepad and a pen. At first, he worried someone would think he was up to something shady, but the casino floor staff barely looked at him. Old guy with a limp, scribbling in a notebook between spins. They'd seen worse. He sat for hours playing minimum bets, watching, recording. He timed how long it took from pressing the button to the reel stopping. He timed how often the fake-out near misses happened. He timed the idle cycles between spins when he didn't press anything. He wasn't looking for specific numbers. He was looking for regularity. Rest, spin, cool down, tiny reset glitch, rest, spin. His notes started filling with patterns, not winning combinations. He didn't bother writing which symbols appeared, just time intervals. He discovered that each machine seemed to run on a loop, not a simple one. Not something like every 50th spin pays out. No, this was subtler. More like a metronome that occasionally skipped or stuttered in a way you could feel if you'd spent your life holding a steering wheel and counting seconds between stops. Every now and then, the machine would hesitate for a fraction longer before allowing the next spin, as if some internal pseudo-random number generator was resetting. He started hitting the button exactly after that micropause. And over again, the machine responded with a win that, on paper, should have been just as likely as any other. It wasn't a cheat code. It was like learning how to clap along to a song no one else could hear. One night, as he sat hunched over his notepad at a small casino off the highway between Henderson and Boulder City, a cocktail waitress stopped in front of him. "You want another coffee, sweetheart?" she asked. "You've been here a while." Ray blinked. He looked at the time on the machine. Almost midnight. "I'm good," he said. "Thanks." She nodded and moved on, weaving between chairs and carts. Ray looked down at his notes. He had pages now. Columns of timings. Little arrows. Circles where he thought the sweet spots were. Scribbled comments like, "Delay longer here," and "Cycle resets after idle." He closed the notebook. Time to test it for real. He had been careful so far. Small bets. Small wins. Nothing that would stick out. Nothing that would make anyone remember his face. But there was no point collecting data if he never actually used it. He cashed out from his current machine, walked slowly down the row until he found another Lucky Strikes that felt right. The hum was slightly out of sync with the others. An older model, maybe, or one that maintenance hadn't rebooted in a while. He sat down. He put $100 into the bill acceptor. It felt like a lot, because it was, for him. He adjusted his glasses, set his stopwatch on the small ledge above the buttons, and waited. The machine blinked, chimed, waited. He didn't rush. He watched the lights pulse. He counted under his breath. 3, 4, 5. Now. He pressed. The reels spun. He didn't look at them. He watched the timing instead. The whir lasted exactly as long as his notes suggested it would during a neutral state. No win. He didn't flinch. He waited again. Watched the idle animation, felt the hum. There, a slightly longer pause before the sidelights ran their little sequence again. Now, he pressed. The reels spun. He felt it this time. A different energy in the machine, as ridiculous as that sounded. The first reel stopped on a high-value symbol. The second slowed, clicked past two useless icons, and stopped on the same symbol. The third reeled through a blur, slowed, clicked, 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 stopped. Three matching symbols in the center line. The machine exploded into lights and sounds. Jackpot, $4,800. Whoa! Someone two machines down shouted. Look at you, Pops! Ray's hands tightened on the seat for a second. His heart pounded, but his face remained mostly calm. Decades of dealing with rowdy passengers had taught him how to keep a neutral expression no matter what was happening inside. A slot attendant walked over with a plastic smile and a clipboard. Congratulations, sir, she said. Big one, huh? Guess so, he said. She took his ID, filled something out, radioed for approval. Security cameras swiveled overhead. An older man winning $4,800 at a slot wasn't exactly news. The casino wanted pictures of people like him holding big fake checks. Winners encouraged play. First time playing? She asked, making small talk. First time in a while, son, Ray replied. Maybe you should stick around, she said. Seems like your lucky night. He smiled faintly. In his pocket, his stopwatch pressed against his leg. It wasn't luck, not the way she meant it. He took the payout in cash, folded the thick envelope, and left the casino quietly. On the walk back to his truck, the desert air smelled like wet asphalt and cigarette smoke. His knee hurt. His mind raced. If he was right, if that win wasn't just coincidence, what he'd just done wasn't gambling. It was something else. He drove home. He didn't turn on the radio. He listened to the rhythm of the windshield wiper blades instead, counting seconds between swipes. It didn't become a $63,000 operation overnight. It started with curiosity, then a few experiments, then the slow, creeping realization that his weird talent for timing had intersected with a tiny, exploitable flaw in a machine designed by people who never imagined a retired bus driver would sit with a stopwatch for weeks. Ray didn't understand the math behind pseudo-random number generators. He couldn't write code or design a circuit, but he understood behavior. He understood that these older machines, unlike the fully modern ones, didn't generate every outcome from scratch in some distant server farm. They relied on local cycles, local states, internal lists of numbers that looped and refreshed in patterns. He didn't need to know the exact numbers. He just needed to know when the loops lined up in his favor more often than not. So he started treating the whole thing like his old route. Study, adjust, refine. He kept adding to his notebooks. He drew crude graphs of hot windows, not in terms of slot superstition, but in terms of when the machine seemed more willing to let go of money based on how long it had been idle, how many spins had happened since a big payout, how long the last cycle had lasted. He mapped which machines in which casinos behaved how on which days. He discovered that maintenance staff sometimes rebooted entire banks of machines at specific times. 4 a.m. on Sundays here, 2 p.m. on Wednesdays there, and that after such reboots, the cycles took time to settle. He learned to avoid those windows and focus on machines that had been humming uninterrupted for hours. He tested different delay patterns between pressing the button and letting the machine time out and spin on its own. Little by little, his hit rate improved. Not every spin, not even most spins, but enough that over weeks he found that his balance went up more often than it went down. He wasn't rich, not yet, but he stopped losing. For casinos, that was a problem, even if they didn't know it yet. Ray knew he couldn't just sit in one casino every night hitting the same machines. That would be like parking a bus in the same illegal spot every day and expecting the meter maid not to notice. So he rotated. He made a list of second-tier casinos within driving distance. Not the big names on the strip with massive security departments and teams of statisticians watching every dollar like hawks. The smaller joints, local spots, highway stops that offered cheap buffets and loose slots, advertised on billboards. Some had 3 or 4 machines from the Lucky Strikes family. Some had 20. He visited each one at different times of day, learning their quirks. He played small at first. If he could turn $100 into $200 or $300 using his timing, he'd cash out and leave. If a machine felt off, out of rhythm, out of sync, he'd walk away, no matter how tempting it was to push his luck. He treated it like a job, an invisible second career. Drive, park, observe, play, leave. His notebooks multiplied. He bought a cheap lockbox at a hardware store and bolted it to the floor of his bedroom closet. The first time he slipped $10,000 in cash into it, more money than he'd ever seen in one place that was actually his hands shook. He told himself he was just building a cushion, just making sure he could pay for a new truck when the current one finally gave up. Maybe fix the roof. Maybe visit his son in Oregon without having to count every penny. He didn't set out to take $63,000. But tiny advantages applied consistently add up. By the time he realized how far he'd gone, he was too deep to stop. The first time any casino really noticed him wasn't when he hit a big jackpot. It was when his name started showing up on multiple win logs across different properties. Not huge wins, just more than expected. How they figured it out began with a man who, in his own way, lived by patterns too. His name was Alex Kim. Alex was 27, a data analyst at a regional gaming company that owned a handful of casinos across Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. He did not care about slot machines beyond their numbers. His world was spreadsheets and databases and reports for executives who wanted simple answers to complicated questions. Are we making enough money? Which machines are underperforming? Where should we put the new games? One Tuesday afternoon, Alex was running a routine report. He filtered out the newest machines. They had their own data pipelines. He focused on legacy slots, older cabinets that were still on the floor because some people liked their look, their sound, or just hadn't moved on. He noticed a small anomaly. In 3 different casinos spread across 2 states, a specific model line, Lucky Strikes, was paying out slightly more often than its model sheet predicted. Not by much, maybe a fraction of a percentage point above expected return, enough that any single location wouldn't raise an eyebrow. But when he looked at the aggregated data across all properties, the pattern became clearer. In a perfect world, the variance of payouts should be symmetrical around the expected value. Here it was skewed, just a bit. Alex was curious. He pulled deeper logs. He looked at timestamps. At first, it still looked random. Different days, different times. He almost closed the report, chalking it up to noise. Then he noticed something else. A cluster of larger-than-average wins on Lucky Strikes machines around the same dates at 3 different casinos. One in Henderson, one near Flagstaff, one in a dusty town off the freeway in New Mexico. He cross-checked the player club cards associated with those wins. Most were anonymous cash play, people who didn't swipe a card, but in a couple of instances, the winner had a name, Raymond Dole. Alex leaned back. "Who are you, Raymond?" he muttered. He pulled Ray's player profile. It wasn't impressive. Minimal total play. No huge comps, no VIP flags, just a handful of visits over the last year. But the wins attached to his name, even if they were just a sample of his play, were odd. Higher than average. Spread out. Never at the same casino twice in a row. Alex dug further. He asked IT to pull footage from the times and machines associated with those wins. It took a few days. When the files landed in his inbox, he queued them up one by one. There he was, in Henderson, sitting calmly at a Lucky Strikes, pressing the button with the same unhurried rhythm. In Arizona, wearing a different jacket, glasses perched on his nose, same posture, same small nod whenever the machine hit. In New Mexico, leaning a cane against the machine, his jacket different again, his hair under a baseball cap, but his eyes the same, focused, listening, as if tuning into a station no one else could hear. If you watch the footage quickly, he looked like any other older regular. But Alex watched differently. He slowed the footage down. He brought up the win-loss data for each of those sessions. Ray rarely chased losses. He'd sit down, spin a dozen times, stand up, move on. When he hit, he often cashed out within a few spins. He never went for the one more big hit. He played like a man following a plan, not a feeling. Alex made a timeline. He marked each location where Ray had played, each date, each win amount. A pattern emerged. No casino saw him enough to be suspicious, but across the company's entire footprint, his presence was like a faint watermark, a slowly climbing line of payouts that, when added together, became something that made Alex's palms sweat. He brought it to his boss. At first, she thought he was overreacting. "It's just an old guy getting lucky," she said. "We comp guys like that. It makes everyone else feel like they can win too. Alex shook his head. Look at the distribution, he said, pointing. Look at how he moves. Look at the specific machines he chooses. This isn't random. So you're saying he's cheating? She asked. He hesitated. Not exactly, he said. We've seen people use devices, camera phones, Bluetooth stuff. This guy doesn't use anything. He never even bets max. But something is off. He's doing better than he should, consistently, on a specific line of machines. She frowned. Talk to compliance, she said. Loop in security, quietly. If there's a flaw in the games, we need to know. Ray had no idea he had made it onto any analyst's radar. From his perspective, he was still small. He still drove his old truck, lived in his mobile home, wore the same worn jackets he'd had for years. He didn't buy a new watch or a flashy car. He didn't suddenly start tipping $100 bills or asking for private rooms. He was careful. He never took more than a certain amount from any one casino in a given month. 10,000 here, 15,000 there, 6,000 somewhere else. He kept most of the money in cash, spread across safe deposit boxes in different banks. Some under his name, some under an old family trust his wife had set up years ago. He didn't talk about it with anyone. His son in Oregon called sometimes asking how he was doing. Getting by, Ray would say, same as always. When his son mentioned money worries, Ray sent a little extra now and then. Never so much that it'd raise questions. I had some savings, he'd say. Don't worry about it. Inside, the numbers kept ticking upward. 40,000, 200,000, 1 million. The first time he crossed 7 figures, he sat alone at his small kitchen table and stared at the calculator display for a long time. He should stop, he thought. He had enough to be comfortable, to fix everything that needed fixing, to never worry about the grocery bill again. He should quit before someone noticed. But quitting meant admitting that all this had been a temporary detour, a weird lucky break. And Ray, deep down, didn't think of it that way. He thought of it as something he'd earned. He hadn't hacked anything. He hadn't colluded with employees. He hadn't bribed anyone or tampered with any circuits. He'd simply paid attention to a flaw someone else had left in plain sight. Bus drivers know something about poorly designed systems. He kept going. By the time the company's compliance department met with gaming regulators to discuss a concern about anomalous performance in legacy slot machines, Ray's run had already spread across 3 states. The meeting was quiet. No press releases. No dramatic raids. Just a handful of people in a bland conference room looking at graphs. The machines in question are all older cabinets running the Lucky Strikes line, Alex explained, sliding a chart onto the screen. They were certified years ago under older standards. They technically still fall within acceptable ranges. But when you look at the aggregate data across properties, you see this. He pressed a button. The graph zoomed out. A faint line representing expected payout percentages. Another line, the real one, sitting just above it, like a shadow slightly misaligned. It's subtle, he said, but it's consistent. And when you overlay this with footage of some regulars, one player in particular stands out. He clicked again. Ray appeared on the screen, frozen mid-spin. Has he been caught using any devices? One regulator asked. No, Alex said. We've reviewed hours of footage. He doesn't do anything unusual except win more than he should, and he seems to target specific machines. Another regulator leaned forward. Could he have insider knowledge? She asked. Someone from the manufacturer, maybe? A disgruntled employee? We checked, Alex said. No obvious connections. He's a retired bus driver, lives on the edge of town, no criminal record, no tech background. If he's exploiting something, it's not with code. Then how? Someone else asked. Alex hesitated. We think, he said slowly, there may be a timing vulnerability in the way these older machines seed their random number generator. Nothing illegal, just outdated. If you can predict the cycle windows even loosely, you might be able to push the odds in your favor more than we're comfortable with. Is that even possible? One regulator said skeptically. In theory, yes, Alex replied. These machines weren't designed with modern timing attacks in mind. They rely on simple local entropy sources. It's like, he searched for a metaphor. It's like a bus schedule, he said finally. If you know the exact route and every possible delay, You can show up at the stop at the exact right moment every time. Everyone else thinks it's random. You know it's not. A couple of people in the room exchanged glances. So what do you want? One asked. Authority to pull the machines? We'd like to retire the entire line, Miss Alex said. Quietly. Replace them with updated models. And in the meantime, we'd like permission to restrict certain players from using them. You mean this guy, the regulator said, nodding at Ray. Alex sighed. Yes, he said. Technically, he hasn't broken any laws. But he's exploiting a weakness we can fix. And until we do, he's going to keep taking money we can't afford to lose. The end of Ray's run didn't look like a Hollywood climax. There were no flashing red and blue lights. No SWAT team storming a casino floor. No handcuffs. It began with something small and polite, the way his life so often had. He was sitting at a Lucky Strikes in a quiet locals casino in Arizona, mid-afternoon on a Tuesday, pressing the button with his usual unhurried cadence. He'd had a good month. He felt the familiar satisfaction of being in sync with the machine, of pressing now instead of then, and seeing the reels respond like a trained animal. He was down a little for the session, but that didn't bother him. The long-term curve still pointed up. He pressed, spin, whir, click. Small win. He pressed again. Whir. No win. He sat back, letting his internal metronome reset. He sensed someone behind him before he heard them. Mr. Dole? The voice was male. Calm. Ray turned. Two men stood there. Not in suits, but not in security uniforms either. Business casual. Casino IDs on lanyards. Yeah? Ray said. One of them, mid-30s, tidy haircut, gave him a professional smile. My name's Chris, he said. This is Miguel. We're with security. Do you mind coming with us for a minute? We just want to talk. Ray's first instinct was annoyance. I'm kind of in the middle of something, he said, gesturing at the machine. Can it wait? I'm afraid it's a little important, Chris said gently. We won't keep you long. A few other players glanced over, curious. The last thing Ray wanted was a scene. He sighed, hit the cash out button, pocketed his ticket, and stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. What's this about? He asked as they walked. We just have a few questions about your play, Miguel said. Nothing to worry about. They led him to a small room off the main floor. Not an interrogation cell, just an office with a table, a couple of chairs, a muted TV on the wall showing security feeds. Can I get you water? Coffee? Chris asked. I'm fine, Ray said. He sat. Chris sat across from him. Miguel leaned against the wall. Chris folded his hands. You've been visiting several of our properties over the last year, he began. You play mostly the same kind of machines, and you've been winning more than average. Enough that it's shown up in our internal reports. Ray felt his pulse pick up. He kept his face calm. I thought that's what you wanted, he said. Winners. Makes everyone feel hopeful, right? Chris smiled faintly. We do like winners, he said. But we like them within certain patterns. Our games are supposed to be random. Over time, people win and people lose. The house comes out ahead. That's the math. And you think I broke your math? Ray asked, one eyebrow rising. Chris paused. We think you may have found a way to give yourself an advantage, he said. We've reviewed hours of footage. You're not using any obvious devices. You're not colluding with any staff. But you target specific machines in specific ways, and the results are unusual. Unusual doesn't mean illegal, Ray said calmly. No, Chris agreed. It doesn't, which is why this isn't a legal conversation. It's a business one. Ray looked from Chris to Miguel and back. So what's the business? And he asked. You want me to stop being lucky? Chris took a breath. We're asking you, as a condition of using our properties, not to play certain machines anymore, he said. Specifically, the older Lucky Strikes line. We're in the process of removing them anyway. In the meantime, if you continue to play them, we'll have to ask you to leave. Permanently. Ray snorted. You're banning me for pressing a button? He said. Seems a little harsh. We're banning you from certain games that we believe you're exploiting, Chris said. Our license requires us to maintain fairness. If we believe a game is compromised, we have to act. You've done very well on them. Too well. We're closing that door. And if I refuse? Ray asked quietly. Miguel shifted his weight. Then we issue a trespass notice, he said. Casino-wide. Our sister properties will do the same. It'll go through the network. You'll be 86th. Ray understood that term. Every old Vegas regular did. He stared at the table for a moment. He thought of arguing. He thought of telling them they had no idea what they were talking about, that he was just a lucky old man who enjoyed playing his pension away. But he knew better. He'd seen enough people get thrown off buses for making scenes. There was a point at which shouting didn't change anything. It just made you leave with less dignity. He looked up. So that's it, he said. You can't prove I did anything wrong, but you don't like that I'm winning, so you're taking the toys away. Chris held his gaze. You're right, he said quietly. You didn't do anything wrong in the traditional sense, but you found a crack. It's our job to seal it. You can keep playing other games if you want, but the ones you've been using are done. Ray thought about all the hours, all the notes, all the small wins that had built into something huge. He thought about his tiny house outside Henderson, his rattling truck, his aching knee. He thought about the way the machines had hummed under his fingers, like engines meeting his rhythm. He also thought about something else. He'd already won. He didn't need to push it. He leaned back. You know what? He said. I think I'm good. Chris blinked. Good? He repeated. Done, Ray said. You don't want me to play? I won't play. You keep your machines. I'll find other hobbies. Miguel frowned slightly as if this wasn't the reaction they'd predicted. No appeal? He asked. No complaint? Ray shook his head. Nah, he said. I spent my whole life on other people's schedules. First the cities, then the casinos. Maybe it's time I listen to my own. He stood up, using his cane. Chris watched him for a moment. For what it's worth, he said, what you did, I'm not sure anyone else could have pulled it off that quietly. Ray gave him a small, wry smile. That's the trick, kid, he said. You ride the route long enough, you learn when to get off before the wreck. He walked out. No one stopped him. No one followed. He cashed out his remaining voucher, walked through the rows of machines that had once felt like an orchestra he could conduct, and stepped into the parking lot. The desert evening was cool. The lights of the casino glowed behind him, humming their endless invitation to whoever wanted to sit and hope. He got into his truck and drove away. The aftermath didn't make headlines. Casinos don't like advertising their vulnerabilities. The Lucky Strikes machines, already aging, disappeared from floors over the next several months. New, flashier cabinets took their place, equipped with more sophisticated randomization and centralized monitoring that closed the little timing windows Ray had slipped through. Gaming commissions quietly updated some regulations. Certification tests for legacy machines now included more robust timing checks. Internally, the companies wrote memos with phrases like timing-based exploitation potential and behavioral anomalies in legacy RNG implementations. Publicly, nothing changed. People still sat, still fed bills into machines, still chased symbols on spinning reels. But somewhere in the numbers, the little skew that had bothered Alex flattened. The line settled back where it was supposed to be. The money that had leaked out through that invisible crack stopped leaking. The money that had already flowed out, that was gone. Scattered across safety deposit boxes, converted into cashier's checks, moved through small banks in small towns. No one could find it. No one could find him either. After that last conversation with casino security, Ray went home, opened his lockboxes, and spent a week quietly consolidating his winnings. He paid off his son's mortgage without explaining exactly how. He set up small educational funds for his grandchildren. He fixed the roof, replaced the truck, paid off every debt he'd ever had. Then he did something he'd never done before. He booked a one-way ticket. Where he went exactly became part of the story people told about him. Some said Argentina, a cheap house near the water, paid for in cash. Others swore they'd seen him in Portugal, sitting at a cafe, reading a newspaper while tourists stumbled past. One rumor, whispered by a floor tech who swore he recognized that old man's eyes, said he still lived near Henderson, under a different name, occasionally walking through casinos just to listen to the new machines, shaking his head at the rhythms. They'd fixed. Alex, the analyst, didn't care much about the rumors. What stuck with him was the feeling he'd had watching the footage of Ray playing. Calm, patient, unhurried. Like a man counting seconds at a bus stop, knowing that if he waited for exactly the right moment, the doors would open just for him. In the long run, the house always wins. That's what they tell you. They don't tell you that sometimes, for a little while, in the space between outdated code and a retired bus driver's ear for rhythm, someone can slip through. He didn't beat the casinos by hacking them. He didn't brute force the system or install malware or collude with staff. He didn't do any of the things the usual cheats do. He sat. He listened. He pressed a button at the exact moment everyone else ignored. And over 19 months across 3 states, in hundreds of quiet sessions, he turned a tiny edge into an empire of his own. $63 million. Not in one big jackpot, not in a dramatic, life-changing spin,